Welcome to the second series, which is basically around insecure thinking, anxiety, and may point towards bullying. So this time, for those of you who've just tuned into this one and not the other series, I'm Annie Poole and I'm a transformative coach. I trained with Michael Neal and some of the top psychologists across America and in London, UK. I was a primary head teacher for nearly 2.5 decades, and I'm passionate about campaigning for mental wealth in education because that's where our children and youth spend most of their time. So I'd like to start today a quote from Michael Neal from The Space Within. Michael, I'm very grateful was my mentor, and I did my training with Michael. So Michael says, and it's a question on page 20 of his book, do they know where their experience is coming from? When Sid Banks had his enlightenment experience, he saw that all his insecurities and problems were made of thought and had little or nothing to do with the circumstances of his life. It's not that there isn't a world out there, but that our experience of it is 100% an experience of our own thinking. This is why I often call this work the inside out understanding, and Michael's written a book called The Inside Out. Until someone begins to recognise that thought is the source of experience, as opposed to genetics, environment, personal history, or any other circumstance you can name. Once you realise this, you have no choice but to focus your energy on fixing, changing, or otherwise altering those external factors in an attempt to enhance and improve your experience of life. So if you feel that those external circumstances are the cause of your anxiety, as I used to, and I had a great deal of anxiety as a head teacher, I don't mind sharing that with you. Trying to get a job done, trying to get it done perfectly, and making sure the children in my school had the best possible support, both emotionally and intellectually, that I could ever give them. And so I was trying to be all to everyone, and I had a lot of thinking around that. But now with the 3 principles understanding, I realised that I create my own thinking, and actually the first time I came to understand that, I was a school advisor, and I brought home so much work to do. I was wondering how I was going to get through it, and then I listened to Michael Neal explaining that all experience comes from our thinking and from within us, from inside us. And he didn't say it like that. That's my version of it. But I was sitting, it was a dark November evening, and I was so enthralled that I hadn't put the lights on, and I was in the dark. And I suddenly realised that I was creating this mountain of work through my mountain of thinking. And that if it was me that was doing that to myself, then it'd be okay to let myself off the hook too. I know that might sound very simple and perhaps even a little trite, but actually, perhaps I can illustrate with another story of a young teenager who had the most dreadful home background, and yet he came into school every day without fail, not always on time. And you see, there were 2 types of adults that dealt with that child. There were those who only saw, this is him, he's late, he's lazy, he's X, he's Y, he's Z, is not conforming to the school rules and we must punish him. And you know, there is some truth in that. There are consequences to poor behaviour. But what's crucial when you are looking at anxieties or extremes, you know, say bullying or self-harming or anorexia, whenever a child or a youth is displaying extremes of behaviour, there is usually something running in the background. And I remember this young man not wanting to do sports, and the sports teacher had marched him along, and he was supposed to have detention as a consequence of not bringing his sports kit into school. On spending time with that youth, he couldn't afford a sports kit. He was too embarrassed to wear what he did have. And the only pair of trainers he owned, he shared with 2 or 3 other siblings. I'm afraid I'd have some anxious thinking about going to do sport if I didn't have the right kit and all my friends were looking as though they had everything that I needed. But when sitting with this young man and listening without judging him and hearing his one simple thought that he didn't have the right kit and that everybody might laugh at him, knowing that that was the cause of all his upset, it was simple to sit with him and point him in the direction of his truth. And that is all thinking starts with him. And that his thinking around his PE kit, which started off as a small worry, had been built up in such an anxious way that he played truant and didn't do the lesson. So there are practical things that you can do to support children. You know, that kid didn't have his PE kit, and as a school we had spares. And that child or youth helped us to create a way of sharing the spare PE kit with children and youth that didn't embarrass them, and that was a win-win situation. Again, another child refused to eat for a long time, and as soon as the bell for lunch went, and this was a very tiny child, a 6-year-old, she would go with the other children to collect her lunchbox, and then she would stand clutching the lunchbox and would not move all lunchtime. And what it turned out to be was, because her mum was extremely anxious and really wanted the child to eat at school, because the minute Mum came for her at 3:30, that child scoffed everything in the lunchbox in sight because she was starving. And that behaviour was a way of that child withholding or supposedly gaining power over circumstances. And again, we didn't analyse that. We just made it more. We just made the situation more comfortable for the child, and actually took away the idea of lunchtime for the whole class. And with permission from parents, we had picnics, and eventually the little girl joined in. Now that's just a story to illustrate, you know, how you wouldn't go into great detail about the way that we create our own experiences moment to moment, that thought comes in and it's neutral, which is what happened with the little girl, and she had a trigger thought that said to her, I'm not going to eat at lunchtime, I'm just going to stand here and I'm not moving for anybody. Well, a series of thoughts. And again, it's not about analysing that, it's about particularly the parents understanding that you know, that thinking comes from within the child. It isn't circumstances around food or around school. It starts with a thought within the child. And once we get that child into a space of feeling okay and of not feeling under pressure and having those anxious thoughts, then it just falls away. You know, the illusory brick wall falls away, and that neutral thinking comes in, and the eating is just another thing to do in the day, and the same as a drawing or answering the register. So those are two illustrations of anxious behaviour, and I think I'll probably stop here and address bullying in the third video. Thank you.